Hey everyone. Wow, it feels like a high school reunion in here. You guys are great. I have to admit, I'm a little nervous being up here. You see, my name is John Muldoon, and I'm the principal over at the Puxi campus of Shanghai American School. While I've given a lot of speeches and talked to a lot of people, there's just something about that little red light on the camera that gets to me. But you know what? I always say, it's important to be honest with yourself and others, so there you have it. I'm a little nervous, okay? You guys were laughing a lot during the last talk, which, I'm not gonna lie, puts a little pressure on me. So here's the thing I want to talk to you about today, and I do want to put a little disclaimer out there that this is all from my own experience, and I'm definitely not a psychologist. In fact, I think I see our school psychologist somewhere in the crowd. So yeah. Please don't take any of this as professional advice. All right, so our brains are unbelievably powerful, right? But we don't often stop and think about how we use them. I can actually pinpoint the exact moment I started thinking about how we use our brains. I was in 6th grade. Now, my family was going through a really rough time, and we were spending a lot of time in the car. My dad would drive, me in the passenger seat, and my brother and sister crammed in the back. It wasn't always the most peaceful situation. Anyway, to cope with everything, my dad started listening to these motivational tapes, constantly. Remember cassette tapes? Yeah, it was that era. So there we are, stuck in the car, listening to these voices telling us how amazing life is, how great we are, how everything will be all right. It was the worst. It felt so out of touch with what we were going through as a family, and I just couldn't relate to it. I specifically remember this one guy on the tapes. And Dad, if you're listening, I'm sorry, but this guy, he kept saying the key to happiness was to talk to yourself. And not just casual self-talk, but like full-on positive affirmations. He was saying things like, you have to wake up every morning, look in the mirror, and tell yourself how great you look and how awesome the day is going to be. Now, I was maybe 11 or 12 at the time, and I remember thinking, training your brain to have tiny voices talking to you all day? That's how you know something's wrong. Let me tell you, we had some serious fights in the car about those tapes, mostly started by me. I mean, why couldn't we just listen to the radio like a normal family? Looking back, I understand my dad was going through one of the darkest periods of his life, and these tapes, these voices, were his way of coping, of choosing to hear something positive. At the time, though, I couldn't understand that. Fast forward a few years, and I'd just become an assistant principal. I was feeling pretty good about myself, and I found out my favorite teacher ever, my 6th grade social studies teacher, was retiring. I decided I had to see him. So on a whim, I drove to the school and walked straight to his classroom. I didn't tell anyone I was coming. I just went. I walked down the hall, right to his classroom, and opened the door. He looked up and said something like, "Holy moly." I can't repeat what he actually said here, and gave me this big hug. Then he said, "John Muldoon, I can't believe you're still alive." I was like, "Are you sure you're thinking of the right John?" But he wasn't confused. We ended up talking for a long time that day, and he shared something that really stuck with me. He said, in his 35 years of teaching, he'd never met an angrier kid than me. It's funny now, but also kind of sad, that this teacher, who I adored, remembered me for my anger. But his words stuck with me. I realized how much my anger had defined me back then. Now, change didn't happen overnight. Let's rewind a bit from my assistant principal days, back to when I was in 9th grade. Life wasn't any easier then. In fact, I was probably even angrier than in 6th grade, and I had 0 friends. My grades were a disaster, and I was on the verge of failing out of high school. I was seriously isolated and unhappy. But then, another history teacher, probably why I became a history teacher myself, took me under his wing. This teacher was like a Jedi master of psychology. I'm not kidding. I owe this man my life. He waged what I can only describe as psychological warfare on me, pushing my buttons until he tricked me into wanting to do well in school. To this day, I have no idea how he did it, but it worked. The transformation was unbelievable. I went from having serious talks with my counselor about not coming back to school to getting straight A's and B's, being nicer, and even making a few friends. It was a complete 180. My dad was so suspicious of this sudden change that he actually asked me if I was on drugs. Unfortunately, like most good things in life, this period of academic success didn't last. You can't trick a semi-intelligent teenager into doing something they don't want to do forever. By the end of the year, the gig was up. I had a huge blow-up with this teacher. Not my smartest move, picking a fight with a Jedi mind master, and left the year feeling angry, deflated, and confused. I kept replaying the events in my head, wondering how I let myself get tricked. Little did I know, I was on a quest for an epiphany, and while I wish I could tell you it hit me in a flash of lightning while standing on a mountaintop, that's not quite how it happened. I was working a terrible summer job at a local lake. One day, this mom and her kid walked in. The kid was playing with a Matchbox car, and get this, it was a model of my dad's old car. Same sparkly gold paint, same weird white roof. It was uncanny. As soon as I saw that car, it was like I could hear that motivational tape guy's voice in my head again. It was almost too much to handle. I stood there, less than a week after my blow-up with my teacher, and it hit me. This couldn't be a coincidence. This teacher had somehow tricked my brain into wanting to succeed, and now this car was reminding me of the time someone told me you could trick your brain into doing anything. There had to be a connection. Of course, now I understand that connection. Our brains are incredibly powerful. There are tons of studies about thought patterns, about how the things we tell ourselves, even unconsciously, take root and influence our behavior. For example, I was recently reading this fascinating article about a study done in 1911, back when it was fashionable for women to wear those big, elaborate hats. Researchers noticed that women would instinctively duck their heads when going through doorways, even when they weren't wearing the hats. It turns out that when a pattern is established in our brains, we tend to repeat it, even unconsciously. Then there was this other study from 2013 that focused on young women with anorexia. Researchers observed that despite being on the smaller side and having ample space, these women would walk through doorways sideways, almost as if they were trying to squeeze through a tight spot. It turned out that their disordered thinking patterns were so deeply ingrained that they were influencing even the most basic physical actions, like walking through a door. The craziest part is that these women were completely unaware of these thought patterns and their impact on their behavior. Another study, this one from the University of Pennsylvania, found that just by mentally rehearsing the act of throwing a football, athletes could achieve performance gains similar to those gained through actual physical practice. It's amazing to think that simply by visualizing an action, we can actually improve our ability to do it. Now, I didn't know about any of these studies when I was 15, but I did have years of motivational tapes ringing in my ears. So being the scientific genius that I was, I decided to conduct an experiment on myself. I know, you can't really do that, but I was 15. Give me a break. My experiment was simple. I was going to become cool. Not just a little cool, but ridiculously cool. And let me tell you, this was a lofty goal. I was not cool in high school. My students now tell me they can't believe I wasn't the coolest kid in school, but trust me, it's true. Anyway, I decided to follow the advice of that motivational tape guy. Every morning, I would look in the mirror and tell myself how incredibly cool I was. And because I'm nothing if not committed, I even painted the word cool in big blue letters on my bedroom wall. I was going all in. Now, whether it was my young and impressionable mind or just sheer desperation for something positive in my life, I actually started to believe I was cool. I know, it sounds crazy, right? Even my wife thinks it's a little much. But here's the thing. My younger sister, who actually was cool and popular, was not buying it for a second. One day, she walked in on me while I was in my room, probably singing along to some music and admiring my cool wall, when she just snapped. She told me that if I had to constantly tell myself I was cool, then I definitely wasn't cool. And to make matters worse, she said that if I had to go around telling other people how cool I was just making myself look even worse. Ouch. Then she said something that, unintentionally, was brilliant. She told me that maybe, instead of trying to be cool, I should just try being happy for a while. So the rest of the family wouldn't be so miserable around me. Harsh but fair. After she left, I sat there on my bed, completely crushed. My experiment had failed. Not only was I not cool, but I was also painfully uncool. But then I realized something. It wasn't that I didn't feel happy. It's that I didn't feel anything. Except for anger. That's when it hit me. My default emotion, the one I felt constantly, was anger. So I did the smartest thing I've ever done. I asked myself why. I went all the way back to 6th grade, unpacking all the things that had happened, all the things outside my control that were fueling my anger. It was painful, but it was necessary. It took a while, but eventually I decided to try a new experiment. I couldn't quite bring myself to try my sister's advice and just be happy. That felt too big. So instead, I decided to focus on being thankful. And because I do everything with a bit of intensity, I went all in on gratitude. I was thanking everyone for everything. You let me borrow a pencil? Best day of my life. I was showing up at people's doorsteps years after the fact to thank them for something they'd done. People didn't know what to make of me. Some thought I was being sarcastic. My dad once again asked if I was on drugs. But something amazing happened during this period. I started to notice all the good things in my life. Things I'd been missing because I was so focused on being angry. And by acknowledging the things I was grateful for, I started to feel happier. This experience taught me that I needed to be more conscious of my thoughts, to actively manage them before they managed me. So I started developing little rules, or what I like to call trade secrets, for being a good person. The first rule, the one I've followed every day since I was 15 years old, is simple. Give sincere thanks 3 times a day. That's it. These days, I do it a lot more than that, but 3 times a day is a good starting point. My second rule is, be great. Now, I'm not talking about some arrogant, I'm better than everyone else kind of great. It's more about how I respond when someone asks how I'm doing. My go-to response is always something over-the-top positive, like, I'm great, never been better, living the dream. Now, some people might say this is just faking it till you make it, but that's not what's happening here. I'm not trying to convince myself I'm great. I'm using these positive affirmations as a way to check in with myself. Every time someone asks how I'm doing, it's a reminder to take stock of my emotions. And most of the time, I am genuinely feeling great. But every now and then, that 0.1% of the time, I might not be feeling so great. And that's okay. In those moments, I might be honest and say, you know what, I'm actually not feeling so great today. Depending on who it is, I might even share why. The point is, I'm consciously acknowledging my emotions and, most importantly, deciding what I'm going to do about them. Because if we don't actively manage our thoughts and emotions, they will manage us. I know this from experience. If you don't have a system, a way to process and redirect those negative thoughts, you're just along for the ride. And trust me, that ride can be rough. Now, I know what you might be thinking. This all sounds a bit woo-woo. And you're right, it's not exactly a scientifically proven method. But it works for me, and I'm not the only one. Behavioral scientists have been studying the power of positive self-talk and cognitive reframing for years. Essentially, it comes down to this. First, you have to identify the emotion you're feeling. What is it? Anger? Sadness? Fear? Give it a name. Second, figure out where it's coming from. What happened that triggered this emotion? This can be uncomfortable, but it's important to understand the root of the problem. Third, decide how you want to feel instead. Do you want to feel happy, peaceful, content? And finally, start consciously changing your thoughts and self-talk to align with that desired emotion. It's about replacing those old negative patterns with new, positive ones. This isn't about denying reality or pretending everything is perfect. It's about actively choosing how you want to respond to life's challenges. It's about being your own coach. We all deserve a great coach in our corner, and who better than ourselves? Look, I get it. This is hard work. Being your own coach is a full-time job, but it's worth it. I truly believe that learning to manage my thoughts and emotions saved my life. It might not work for everyone, but it worked for me. The power of our minds is undeniable. We can't just let our thoughts run wild. We need to be intentional, to cultivate self-awareness, and to actively choose the thoughts and beliefs that serve us. So my challenge to you is this. Start paying attention to your thoughts. Listen to those voices in your head and most importantly, be your own best coach. Thank you.